My name is Elizabeth Holcomb. I'm a Senior Research Associate at the USC Polius Center for Higher Education. And I'm joined by some wonderful colleagues from Polius and other institutions, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. So Susan Elrod's going to start us off.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Elrod. I am the former chancellor and professor emeritus at Indiana University South Bend, and now semi-retired and doing Change Leadership Toolkit work full time. And Jen and Alyssa can introduce themselves, but we'll say more about them as they become panelists today. So, Alyssa.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Crittenden. I'm the Vice Provost for Graduate Education and the Dean of the Graduate College and a Professor of Anthropology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I'm delighted to be here today, so thank you so much for the invitation. And I will pass it to my colleague, Jen.
There we go. Sorry, get rid of the technology. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Drake, Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Grand Valley State University in Michigan, also a professor of English, and really happy to be here with you today.
Awesome. Thank you both. Now we'll hear a little bit about Polius, as we should, from Elizabeth.
Thanks, Susan. So again, I just want to welcome everyone who's just joining on behalf of the Polius Center for Higher Education at University of Southern California, Ross Sears School of Education. We are a higher education research center, and our work focuses on equity in higher education in a number of different capacities. I wanted to share just a couple of highlights and news items with you all before we dive into today's webinar on the Change Leadership Toolkit. So our biggest news is that we recently merged with another research center at USC Ross Sears called the Center for Enrollment Research Policy and Practice. So we are super excited to bring our wonderful colleagues from SERP together with our Polius team to broaden and expand the work that we do to promote equity in higher education. There's a lot more to come on what that is going to look like and mean for the center. We'll have a lot more of these webinars and additional resources and news that we release over the coming months. But if you haven't checked out our work, you can visit polius.usc.edu and read more about the research that we're doing on change leadership, as well as other topics related to equity in higher education. And then I'll talk a little bit later about some of the newest resources that we've developed for this Change Leadership Toolkit project. But I would love for us to just dive right in. So I'll turn it back over to Susan to give you an overview, and then we'll move into our panel after that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So I probably don't need to say much about the crossroads that higher education is facing right now, but we are under extreme pressure from not only external sources, but internal sources, some of which have been building for years, maybe decades. So we're facing continued skepticism regarding the value and cost of a degree, the continued shifts and cliffs in our demographics of our students that affect enrollments, student interest and demand, legislative interventions, political polarizations, technology disruptions, the rise of micro-credentials, international competition, internal pressures such as mission drift and identity crisis, our lack of resources, partly due to shifts in enrollment, but also all kinds of changes that are coming at us from the federal government. Maybe unsustainable financial models, the growing technology platformification of higher education, the adjunctification of the professorate. I could go on. There's so many challenges facing higher education, so these are indeed turbulent and trying times. Incremental adjustments won't address these interconnected challenges, and they call really for a more systemic approach. And that is, of course, what the Change Leadership Toolkit was created to do. So let's first start with a reminder of what systemic change is in higher education. It's change that affects multiple courses, departments, programs, divisions, or beyond, and maybe multiple institutions if you're in a system or you're in a consortium. And most importantly, it's change that results in policies, procedures, norms, cultures, structures. In other words, the system. And it requires that leaders understand the system in which they're operating and trying to change and all of its interacting parts. It requires that leaders know how to navigate that system, leverage opportunities, overcome barriers, and make what we call strategic moves that will result in the systemic changes desired. Ultimately, systemic change is disruptive. It crosses institutional boundaries, impacts infrastructure, engages governance, and challenges ways of knowing, doing, and being, and it's uncomfortable. That's just the nature of change. Here's a reminder of the model that the toolkit is based on. It has three main components. Change leader moves. These are actions leaders take that push on levers that you see in the gray bar, all that rest on the fulcrum of context. And it is that leadership context that is one feature of the toolkit that really helps leaders dive into their systemic environment and figure out what the most strategic moves they can make are. Here's just a reminder of the 8 categories of change leader moves, and our panelists may be featuring some of these moves in their remarks today. Everything from creating a vision to developing a strategy to leading people and teams, fostering diversity, communicating, preparing for the long term. Those are the 8 categories that are featured in the toolkit. And that fulcrum of leadership context is made up of these 7 categories of context, and they're everything from institutional mission. Who are you? Who do you serve? And what is your purpose? Oops, I apologize for that. Leadership and governance. What's your structure? What is your approach? How healthy are your shared governance processes? Culture. Do you have a risk-averse culture? One that's built on innovation? Politics. What are the winds of political support or resistance for change? Human capital and capacity. Do you have the people you need with the skills and abilities to lead the change? Fiscal, physical, and technological resources. Do you have the resources, the spaces, the technology you need? And externalities, a big one right now. Local, state, and federal, either opportunities, which seem slim these days, or barriers, which are some of the toughest ones that we've all faced in a long time. The next piece are levers, and they exist in these same categories, but we refer to them as actionable opportunities. And again, I think our panelists are going to feature one or more levers that they've used. And here's just a quick example. Senate leadership, new technology, or synergistic initiatives could help you balance your activities in favor of systemic change outcomes. Some of the benefits of using the toolkit are it builds an understanding of systemic change, clarifies goals and outcomes. Really important one, engages a team and builds leadership capacity, develops a common language and framework for leading change, and I think some of our panelists will address this as well, provides a roadmap for strategic analysis of the environment in which you're working, and culminates in a plan that helps you lead change and ultimately results in more strategic, scalable, and sustainable change outcomes. So I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to talk about what's new with the toolkit since we've released our most recent version in the spring.
Thank you, Susan. So as I believe Susan may have mentioned, we've been doing this work in some capacity since 2018 at least. We've done several phases of research to develop the toolkit, and the latest took place in 2023 and 2024, where we took a group of campus teams through a professional development curriculum based around the toolkit. And we used feedback from their experience to refine the CLT and to make changes to make it more user-friendly and more actionable. So that's what we call the Toolkit 2.0, which we released in the spring. And we actually have 2 versions of that toolkit. So I think there might be pictures and QR codes if Susan advances to the next piece, or that might be on the next slide, sorry. But we will have links for you to be able to access it. So we have 2 versions of the toolkit now. One that is that updated version, and then we tweaked that updated version just a little bit for use in states where there are significant restrictions around doing equity work. So we're very mindful of the challenges that campuses are under in some of these contexts right now, and we wanted the resources of the toolkit to be broadly available. So they're exactly the same, they just have some different language when it comes to making moves around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Another update that we just did yesterday, actually, is our online resource library, where we link to research tools and case studies around different aspects of the toolkit and the ecosystem model of systemic change leadership. So if you want to learn more about change leader moves or leadership context or systemic change more broadly, we have lots of new resources that we just published in all of those areas. I'm going to actually drop a link for that in the chat right now for you. And we've been able to produce all of these new resources with generous funding from the Gates Foundation. They funded us early on in this process as well, and now they're funding us to do some new work and develop some new resources coming soon, which we'll be able to talk more about. And then the other piece that is coming soon, probably early next year, is an integration of some of the resources from the Change Leadership Toolkit with another project that I work on at the center called Shared Equity Leadership. So we've worked with a lot of leaders that have been using one or the other, either the Shared Equity Leadership Framework or the Change Leadership Toolkit. And we really see a lot of benefits in both models, but we didn't really have a crosswalk or a guide, a how-to guide for how to use these things together. So we've been working on that, and hopefully we'll have that ready to for public consumption early next year to share. The other work that the Gates Foundation is sponsoring right now is we're bringing another set of campuses through professional development around the toolkit. And we're piloting some new methods of learning with these groups. We're working on an asynchronous curriculum. We're doing some coaching and a community of practice to support these schools. So this is a list of campuses here. You'll see all different institution types and contexts that the schools are located in. So that's the great thing about the toolkit, is that it's really usable across a wide array of institutional type and context. And here is the slide that I was looking for with our QR codes. And then I think Susan linked to that as well. So Change Leadership Toolkit 2.0 and 2.0A, which is just that version with language for those in restrictive state environments. And finally, I did drop that link in with our updated resource library, but also wanted to remind you, if you're not aware, that we have, I believe now it's 12 case studies of institutions or departments within institutions that have undergone a systemic change and have used systemic change leadership in some capacity. And they pull out different aspects of that ecosystem model and show what the work of the Change Leadership Toolkit looks like in action. So if you're curious, you're interested in this and you can see, that maybe it would be useful for you, but you're having trouble making it a reality, these case studies have been really great for helping people see what it looks like in action.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. So we dropped some links in the chat, so hopefully you can click on those resources. And now we want to get to our panelists and hear more about how they have used the toolkit on their campuses to give you all a sense of how you might find the toolkit useful. So we met Alyssa, and she's the Vice Provost for Graduate Education and Dean of the Graduate College at UNLV. She's an interdisciplinary scholar with expertise in anthropology and human biology. She received her degrees from the University of California, Santa Cruz and University of California, San Diego. And she joined UNLV in 2011 as an assistant professor. So she's a great example of one of those leaders that rose up through the ranks. And we appreciate her being here. She led a team at UNLV that was part of a toolkit project funded by the Sloan Foundation that was focused on graduate programs. And so she's going to speak more about that. And then Jen, who you met, is Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. She was appointed to that position recently after serving as acting provost. She joined Grand Valley in 2020 as the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and received her bachelor's degree from Brown University, master's and PhD in English from the State University of New York at Binghamton, and started off her academic career at the University of Indianapolis, served as in a variety of leadership positions. And before she joined Grand Valley, she was also provost and vice president for student and academic life at the Evergreen State College. Jen has recently been engaged with the toolkit through a workshop and continuing engagement with myself and another colleague to navigate the complexities of shared governance and shared leadership in these challenging times. So you'll hear more from Jen about that. So welcome, Jen and Alyssa. Our first question is for you to say just a little bit more about the challenging times you were facing. I gave a big overview, but what was the toolkit used to help you really address? Let's start with Jen.
So in the academic year 2023-2024, here at Grand Valley, we chose to participate in Harvard University's collaborative on academic careers in higher education, or COACH. Some of you may have participated in that body of work. And then we appointed a task force of academic administrators and faculty leaders to coordinate that work. We received our results in fall 24, good response rate, 57%, so very reliable data. The group was full-time tenure track and non-tenure track faculty. And the survey did show some significant areas of strength for our institution, including departmental collegiality, engagement, and leadership, facilities, work resources, benefits, family policies, and clarity of tenure and promotion expectations and policies. So great to have strengths. You always want to build on those. But there were some pretty critical areas of concern for us as well around shared governance, shared leadership, senior leadership, and the nature of service and teaching work, and a little bit of context sort of for those areas of concern, right? Like many of you, Grand Valley had begun engaging in pretty wide-ranging change work to respond to the many challenges facing higher ed, particularly since the beginning of President Philomena Mantela's presidency in 2019. And very long story short, what we've begun to call a trust gap had emerged between faculty and staff and the senior leadership team, particularly around the types of change and the pace of change. And tensions were also surfacing among faculty on the academic senate. And then there were increasing concerns, and again, this is not news to you all, around faculty burnout and workload as they sought to support the success of our students during and after the pandemic. So all of these tensions combined sort of through, we could see this in the survey, threatened to undermine the really great work actually that we were doing. Everyone at Grand Valley is very mission focused, works very hard around student success, the teacher-scholar model, but we were not necessarily moving in the same direction around a shared vision. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Just that trust gap. And that is something so significant. All right. Over to Alyssa to say a little bit more about what UNLV was struggling with or trying to achieve.
Thanks so much. Yeah, our project was a bit different in scope. So UNLV was selected as one of 10 national grant recipients for a seed grant through the Sloan Centers for Systemic Change program. And this national graduate education initiative really aimed to sort of identify barriers and then work to remove those barriers, particularly in regard to attrition and completion for doctoral students in physical sciences and engineering, which is a national challenge that we have been focused on in the academy for many years, but we are still making our way. We are still working on a lot of these challenges. And so particularly what we were interested on focusing on before we really could get started with any programming and before we could get started with really sort of making the needle move is we had to get the group together, and we had to all get together collectively, all of the leadership and the faculty, representative faculty from the College of Engineering, the College of Sciences, and then the folks who sit centrally in my unit in the graduate college. And we were really focused on addressing the over-reliance on traditional metrics that we see in the graduate education admissions spaces. So looking at GPA cutoffs, lack of sort of standardization for letters of recommendation, over-reliance on GRE, and really moving toward holistic review for these particular disciplines. So while many programs sort of across graduate education are moving toward holistic admissions and implementing fair rubrics and training reviewers, this pace tends to be a bit slower in a lot of the STEM graduate admission spaces. We're also really interested in looking at models of attrition. We don't really have any good, robust models of who's sort of sluicing out of our pipelines. And so in order to do that, we need to agree on the fact that folks are sluicing out of the pipeline and look at what those challenges are, identify them collectively so that we can come together and figure out how to remove those barriers. We also discussed a lot of complexities with international students, particularly in the STEM space. And another big one is really balancing research potential with preparedness. So how do you come together in a space and really evaluate research readiness for doctoral students, particularly in this moment. And Susan did a great job at the top of the meeting in really articulating some of the challenges we're facing in right now in higher ed in general, but in the grad space, there's this big push toward workforce development. And what does that mean in the STEM space? And how can we prepare our students to be equally successful in the academy and outside of it? And so what does that mean for research preparedness? And so we all had to get together and sort of agree on all of these very large, big picture things and come together to figure out sort of what that meant with how we were going to proceed as multiple units as a collective whole. And so just we relied on the toolkit and worked through it together as a team. And we'll talk more about it, but that was sort of the impetus for our team entering.
Awesome. And all of those challenges, Alyssa, you were ahead of the game several years ago. So hopefully, and we'll hear from you, hopefully that has helped UNLV be even more prepared for the amazing and unprecedented challenges that we're facing right now in graduate programs. So my first question to the panelists, and Alyssa, you alluded to some of this, really was what were the top aspects of the change work that you were doing that was the most difficult that the toolkit had helped you do or is helping you do? So let's just go back to you, Alyssa. Just you were right there, I think, on the cusp, and then we'll go over to Jen. So what was the most challenging piece that the toolkit helped you with?
There were so many challenges, but I know I can only pick one. But I will say that it is a really versatile toolkit. It is a Swiss Army knife of toolkits, but the one that I think that will resonate in this space that I think most people can really relate to, I think, is the challenge to really figure out how to appeal to faculty's core goals. So faculty who maybe are less comfortable with changing admissions practices. So, I mean, I think that it was a much easier conversation where people agreed when we realized that there were challenges and you look at the data and you look at models of attrition and you figure out sort of, you see that there are folks who are not crossing that finish line. Everyone can agree on that. But to change the conversation, to really point to the admissions process as part of that journey, as where this starts, was really challenging, particularly for faculty who are interested in sort of, well, I should say disinterested in shifting admissions away from those sort of tried and true GRE scores and GPA cutoffs, and convincing them that admissions really does require reframing. Even though we're seeing this trend, we're seeing an uptick in this trend, certainly at R1 institutions across the country, but there's still sort of some resistance to this. And I think that was our biggest challenge. And the toolkit was I will just say one thing. I know it was about sort of, yeah, so to stay with that, because I could, oh man, there's a rabbit hole there.
There's a lot.
Yeah, okay, but I'll stay on task. In terms of how the toolkit really helped us is it really did allow us to focus on understand, sort of looking to the data, we all were able to come together to look at sort of the traditional metrics, and there are really robust data out there that they are in fact poor predictors of graduate research success. And so once you come together as a group, we realized, okay, the best thing to do for our STEM faculty is to present the data to them and to appeal to their core goals. So we had to identify, using the toolkit, sort of what were our levers, what could we use to sort of bring some faculty along. So that was the first part of it. And there was a bit of stress over what happens if that doesn't work. What happens if we this works, we sort of change we move toward holistic admissions. We are minimizing additional burden on admissions committees. We're providing structured rubrics that we assist with. We're using data dashboards and giving committees access to what they need. But what happens if we still have folks who aren't interested? And that's where the toolkit, I think, was the most beneficial. Wasn't even in the structured work that we did, but was sort of this ripple effect of really, once we identified those levers, we realized, and this was a wonderful thing that the toolkit provided us with, was that we can sort of leverage policy and in a way sort of, I don't want to say peer pressure, but I'm going to say peer pressure. You can sort of leverage peer pressure, and that, structural change is hard. And it takes a very long time. This is not an overnight situation. This takes years. We've already been working on this now for 3 years. And what happens is, eventually you find those levers, you make your moves, and you get a mass, right? You get a critical mass, and that critical mass starts moving in one direction. And eventually those folks are going to move with the critical mass. And throughout the whole time, we really learned how to sort of emphasize and highlight the benefits for faculty and highlight the benefits for the good of the order, so that it wasn't, and it was never a top-down initiative. And I think that's another thing that the toolkit really emphasizes, is that you need buy-in from all of the stakeholders, that it's only in sort of that context that you really get structural change.
Wow, that was amazing. I heard you, say that it helped you bring people together to get buy-in, create critical mass, but also develop understanding, and maybe understanding in ways that were more broad or deep than you had before. Like, it's okay to leverage the policies. The toolkit gave some permission to do those things. So Jen, over to you. What was going on? Or you mentioned, how did the toolkit though help you tackle such problems as the trust gap, or how is it helping you?
Exactly. It's really helpful. I think there's some nice complementarity here. So Alyssa's group is 3 years in. We're a year in, right? So still very much on our journey, which I think is a really kind of interesting kind of connection and contrast here. So it was a year ago in fall 24. We received our coach results. Again, the team of faculty, staff, and administrators, came together to process that data, and it's quite a robust data set. So it took some time to sift through, to understand what the data was telling us, and to think about ways to address the concerns. And I'll say that process itself heightened tensions for a while, as the team and our diverse constituencies were really struggling to develop a shared definition of the problems that we wanted and needed to solve, and a shared perspective on the best way forward. So really the critical question emerged, how can faculty, staff, and administration come together to build trust when mistrust prevents us from having the necessary difficult conversations? I mean, it's quite a difficult space in which to be. So, but then at the same time, sort of through this process, the steering committee itself was building a culture of collegiality and trust, as in that smaller group, sort of representative group, we were able to have some difficult conversations. We were building trust as we were moving through the shared work. So that was a really important lever for us as we determined what moves to make. We were modeling the fact that trust could be built, and could sort of then leverage our relationships both with the smaller group, but also more broadly our networks, right? To begin to repair the trust gap, or at least lay the groundwork to do so. But so we did decide that we needed to bring in external facilitation for a series of workshops that happened just this past May 2025. And we designed those around with an appreciative inquiry framework, and invited Susan Elrod and Mary Papazian, her colleague, to come in and facilitate. And Susan brought the Change Toolkit to the work. So we were layering, we had the appreciative inquiry framework and then layered in the Change Toolkit. And if we have time, I would love for Susan to talk about, she and Mary did this, right? Amazing. It was really interesting to see how the toolkit itself, I mean, they used the toolkit to walk the team, and this is 80 people, all of the senior leadership team, all of University Academic Senate, all of Provost Cabinet, which includes the dean, so my academic affairs leadership team, all those folks were at the table. And that's a pretty difficult group to pull together, and a pretty amazing group of people. And Susan and Mary, again, used the toolkit sort of step by step, piece by piece, to structure a number of engagement opportunities where we brought the group, we curated the tables, right, in very particular ways, right, to bring that group together around how to have the conversation. And so what worked was there was a research-based structure, which we could talk about. There was a research-based structure that we could use to create a safe space, or at least a safer space, for that particular very diverse group of folks who did not trust each other in multiple directions, to come together, and to get to know, to do some problem naming, problem solving, and also just to connect as humans, right? I mean, that was part of the purpose, right? To kind of cut through the sort of the positionalities, right? And to just really be together also in particular kinds of ways. And that has really laid the groundwork to help us build our capacity to communicate and collaborate effectively.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of build on what you said, the toolkit is kind of malleable, and it's customizable, and it can speak to different aspects of a set of challenges that a campus is facing. And I think that's what was really evident at Grand Valley. I mean, when we put the toolkit together, we never ever thought, tackling a trust gap between the administration and faculty was not something on our mind, but it turned out that it was a way for you all to come together. It kind of levels the playing field because of the kinds of conversations that the toolkit engenders. The same over to UNLV. It brings the faculty together in a level playing field to talk about the context, talk about the issues in ways that are relevant to the particular problem. We always say the toolkit is agnostic of goal, just that you have to have one that is systemic in nature. And I think it's dovetailing with appreciative inquiry is just another example of how malleable and flexible the toolkit is. It can be used in combination with a variety of other different tools or toolkits or frameworks or theories and models of change. And so it really does just create that framing, common language, and level playing field for people to engage. So my next question is just to dive a little deeper. And here you can talk about a specific lever that you used, a specific move or moves, or an aspect of context that was really important in helping you kind of create a breakthrough to move your change effort forward. So let's go back over to Alyssa and UNLV.
Yeah, this was actually another way that the toolkit was really helpful, because I'll move back to that policy piece that was introduced sort of as our team was working through the toolkit. So I'll share a little bit about UNLV. At UNLV, the graduate assistantships sit centrally. So they sit in the graduate college. And they come in, so these are our state-funded graduate assistantships, either for teaching or for research. And they come into the graduate college, and then they are distributed to the academic colleges. And one of the things we realized as we were looking for levers that could really that could really sort of speak to the faculty and could really speak to sort of the challenges we were seeing. And since we were already identifying that a lot of the problems we were seeing were sort of starting at the admissions phase and not sort of the logistics phase of admissions, but the stage of admissions where you're sitting at your conference room table with the door closed and you're actually making the admissions decisions, not any of sort of the structural or mechanistic side. But we realized that a big lever that we could sort of, well, levers and moves, I guess, sort of, they work in conjunction depending on sort of how you're looking at the problem, was the funding for graduate assistants. And so it had never really dawned on us that we could actually use these assistantships to sort of impact not only practice, but eventually policy, and really sort of better understand how these resources were being used and how these resources were being allocated. Are they going only toward programmatic teaching need for undergrads? In some units, that's the case. Are they largely being used just to support research? This was one we learned from the toolkit. We learned that a lot of graduate assistantships, the cost of that assistantship was moved into startup packages for our faculty. So we learned all of these things by just sort of coming together and having that dialogue. We learned the different ways, sort of the different cultural differences in the way that departments were allocating these resources. And so that really helped us because we could then add some structure on top of it that really tethered to sort of providing more funding opportunities for the programs that were willing to undergo sort of the change and analysis and use the dashboards and look at look at their data and really figure out where they could make some meaningful changes. The second thing we did in regard to graduate assistants, which I think is really relevant, is we created a graduate assistants grievance process, so a GA grievance process. This was very timely, and it just so happened that we started creating this process right before our GAs started the process of unionization. And so that was also very important because it provided us a structure, and it provided us sort of a structure to lean on as we were creating this process and tethering it to departments getting funding. We were also able to work with our graduate student body government to really sort of roll this out. And it's being fine-tuned, right? Everything's iterative. By design, these things are not supposed to be sort of in stone once you build them. We also learned that from the Change Leadership Toolkit, is that you come back and you revisit and you modify and you come up with new moves. And as you sort of progress through what you're working through, there's a lot of latitude in the toolkit. There's a lot of latitude to be able to have that flexibility. And so we're now working to sort of perfect that grievance process and really not only hold faculty accountable, but also sort of include graduate students in the process. And so it's really, we're tethering it all together. So it's not just sort of one isolated approach. You can't really take graduate assistants out of the conversation when you're talking about sort of changes in STEM admissions in general. And so I would say those are some of the really big levers and moves that the toolkit really helped us use to our advantage. That has been very successful for our institution.
So affecting policies and how money is allocated to students and creating a structure and set of processes to improve the grievance process on the campus.
Yeah.
Those are systemic changes, right? Policies, structures, and then culture around all of that.
Yeah.
So things that you wouldn't have gotten to if you hadn't been able to engage in the way that you did with the toolkit.
Right. That was sort of, it dawned on us sort of collectively. And it dawned on me. I told the group, and now I say this all the time, but during the work we were doing together, I told the other deans, I said, okay, so it turns out that the graduate assistantships are my carrot and my stick. So, we are using them as such now, but really incentivizing faculty to do that work and to come together, and for them to do it themselves, right? For them to come together as their own community and sort of acknowledge what needed to change was a big one. And sort of the idea that they could get additional funding, or the idea that funding could be restricted if they were out of compliance, was a big one.
Awesome. So I do see there's a question in the chat, and I'm going to just hold on that for a couple of minutes. But once Jen responds, then I think we'll get that question out to the panelists because I think they've alluded to some things. Teaser. So Jen, over to you for moves, levers, contexts that are emerging for Grand Valley in this work.
Absolutely. I mean, the first change leadership move right at the top of the diagram, right, is create vision, expectations, and pacing. So the workshops in May led us towards, again, that shared problem definition, right, and just setting a vision, generating ideas for moving forward together. And I'll say the workshops also supported the lead people in teams change leadership move and the communicating effectively leadership move by bringing us together as a team. Again, we had to part of closing the trust gap is to be around the table together. And to begin to think of ourselves as a collective, as a team, right, from our different kinds of positionalities and perspectives and disciplines and experiences. We're continuing to make moves in those spaces by intentionally using the language of shared leadership in all of our communications, by expanding the steering team to include some new staff as well as our affiliate faculty who are our teaching only faculty, as well as pre-tenure faculty, to intentionally cultivate staff and faculty leadership for this work through a presidential fellows program and developing a coordinated approach to leadership development across the institution. So all of that is already happening and is very powerful. And I want to note the importance of leadership context and just the need to work with intention, to understand your context and to choose the most effective levers that are available. So for us, unsurprisingly, culture and politics are especially key as we're seeking to surface like the unspoken rules, values that are aligned and then the ones that are misaligned, right? The processes on all sides that have led to miscommunication and misunderstanding, really trying to be thoughtful in that space.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And Jen, you just actually answered part of the question that was posed. The question asker notes that you two both have formal leadership positions in the C-suite, if you will. And the question is about really how can others across the institution engage with the toolkit? And I'll say that when we put the toolkit together, we didn't put it together for executive leaders. We put it together for any leader, and that's something that we emphasize. And I think, Jen, in particular, the work at Grand Valley, where there were people of all ranks, departments, everybody was included. Maybe next time, some more staff. This was mostly a focus on the administration and faculty. But maybe, Jen, if you want to make some comments about engaging people beyond the C-suite in the work and how the toolkit might help with that. And then Alyssa, we can have you answer that question as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah. And that's critical, right? You're not going to get change doesn't work if it's top down, right? So not in higher ed, right? So an important, but so again, it's being thoughtful about structure. So again, the steering committee for the shared leadership work, the two co-chairs, one person is a faculty member who is also on Senate, but doesn't occupy one of the formal roles in academic Senate, and then their co-chair is an AVP in my office. So we're modeling shared leadership by having a faculty member and an administrator out of my office co-lead the work. And then our Vice President of People, Equity, and Culture and I are the executive sponsors. And so the four of us work together. And then the steering team, the new iteration, we've just added a member of our PSS group, which is our administrative assistants, our secretarial staff, several administrative professionals who are professional staff in various ways, as well as I said, our affiliate faculty who are our teaching faculty. So there was strong advocacy after those May sessions for to think even more broadly about who should be brought on to the steering team to represent different employee groups and to help us lead the change. And the toolkit again helps you develop that shared language for the shared work.
And the toolkit even helps you think about who should be
Yes.
at the table and in those conversations. So, Alyssa, do you want to give a quick response to that before our final question, which is what advice would you give to people who are thinking about the toolkit or facing challenges? So, Alyssa.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo everything that Jen just said. I mean, I think it's really spot on. I will say, without mentioning any names or any details, that I was part of another team through my university that did a different training, not similar really in terms of the end goal and sort of the project we took to it. But that one was a team that was really heavy with executive leadership and administrators. And I say really heavy, I mean almost exclusively institutional administrators. But the work that was being proposed was work that happens sort of in the labs and classrooms. So the fact that there weren't any frontline workers on that team was a problem. And that was not as successful. So this is the time where I share my shadow CV, right? The things that didn't work. And in that particular experience, that was the downfall of the team. For ours, I think because I come out of faculty and I came straight out of faculty into my current role, which is a bit unusual. I think that that was one of the things that sort of led to us knowing we needed to have faculty buy-in immediately. So we had actual faculty members working with us. I also worked hard to build trust with my colleagues, my counterparts in the dean's offices of the College of Engineering and College of Sciences. They didn't need to be convinced that a Sloan Scholars Program is a great idea for our institution, right? But in order to get there, in order to be ready to create and build such a program and then have it be sustainable and really sort of be there to nourish the students and help them cross that finish line, a lot of changes had to happen. And so you can't actually make changes in admissions in a department without going into the department and talking to the faculty and working with them. I have been in faculty meetings having tough conversations with very robust feedback with faculty members. And so I think we say engage all stakeholders, but that ends up being sort of a trope, right? What does that actually mean? Well, what you learn from the toolkit is that you actually have to push your sleeves up and go in there and do the work, whatever that may be. So whatever project you're working on, it isn't really just sort of theoretical ways that you can do things. It's actually identifying what you do boots on the ground that can move things forward. And so once we realized, we knew from the beginning, actually, from the outset, that we needed to have faculty voices centered in this. That changes the whole dynamic, that changes the whole playing field, because we were only successful because of our faculty. I would argue that we were successful because we all worked together. And certainly, I think that the deans offered some structure, offered some we fed people lunch, right? So we can do things like that. But this doesn't work. Systemic change doesn't work unless you have that critical mass and unless people are really mission driven and you have hit on something that people really want to do. So that's how I would answer that question. Is I think it's a really thoughtful question. I'm really glad it was posed. And I think it's spot on. We are done in the days at my institutions like mine that are large state urban institutions. We are an R1, but we have a large percentage of students who work outside of school, who are the first in their families to come to university, let alone get a post-baccalaureate degree. And so at institutions like this, it does not work without our outstanding faculty, period.
And what I'm hearing from both of you is the toolkit provides an entryway into having those conversations. I think right now, this is something that Adriana Kezar and I have written about recently, the divide between the faculty and the administration, and that could go administration and staff, is killing us right now. And I think that leaders need more tools to engage together because it's a difficult environment. Our C-suite leaders are under different pressures that may make them fearful of engagement. But I think the toolkit is a way to kind of erase that, provide that equal equal footing. And I know at Grand Valley, President Mantella was in all the conversations in addition to the C-suite leaders. And so bringing all those people together around a framework such as the toolkit is really helpful. The other thing that I heard you say, Alyssa, and Jen, you've alluded to it as well. I think in higher education, we are so good at naming outcomes and defining goals, but just not really getting there. How many strategic initiative goals do we have? And the toolkit is a way to get people to action around the important contexts that are operating in their environment. So, our last question, we've got just about 9 minutes ish. If and I'm looking for questions in the Q&A from webinar participants or the chat. But this is uh, here's the closer. What advice would you give people who are facing these difficult times, who are thinking about the toolkit? Let's go over to you, Jen. What advice would you give people? And I see a request for the chat in the chat for that article. Oh, Elizabeth's putting it in there. All right, so over to Jen.
Yeah, just that change leadership is a really long game, particularly now. And the toolkit again is a way, it's a convening strategy. I want to lift the importance of, the toolkit can be used for large or small kinds of, or medium-sized kinds of change work, and change can be led by folks who are positioned in a variety of spaces in an organization, right? So I think that's an important takeaway here. I think the toolkit also, and I've been thinking about this a lot as I was coming, thinking about this presentation, and we're, still at the, in the first, month of this academic year, so starting the second year of our change work. The toolkit really helps you think about how to structure year after year engagement. Again, you heard Alyssa saying they're in the third year of their change work, and the toolkit, as you keep returning to it, and it serves as a reminder, right, of the different pieces of change, the different components of change that you have to attend to at some point in time, and the order will be different depending on your context, right, and your work. But the toolkit kind of breaks those pieces apart and allows you to put them together in the way that you need to. I appreciate that the toolkit is undergirded by the Keck-PCAL model for systemic institutional change. Like there are different models for change, Cotter and so on, but I do again, particularly now, our shared context for higher ed is the change process is a river, right? And so institutional change is really flowing and really dynamic, and sometimes like things are going smooth and fast, and sometimes you're in class 4 or 5 rapids, or frankly class 6 rapids, which is when you're not supposed to be on the river at all, right? So that kind of understanding that model, I think, provides us a way to understand how change feels at different points in time, because it'll be really hard. Like you're going to get stuck, and that doesn't mean you're doing things wrong, right? It means you need to come back into the toolkit, get back up in the balcony, figure out what the barriers are, what and how to navigate them, what levers you can pull, what moves you need to make. There's a recalibration, right, that you need to engage in on a regular basis.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. Alyssa, your advice.
Okay, so paying attention to the clock here, I'll keep it short and sweet. My colleague already just mentioned essentially it's, that time that this is not a quick thing, right? So sort of paying attention, I would argue to paying attention to the timeline, sort of acknowledging the timeline and coming up with short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, I think would be something that I would reiterate. But it is a marathon, but it is sort of also a relay race, right? So you're sort of whoever is leading this, whoever is sort of leading the change, really is setting a pace, and you want to set a pace that will last, right? So what I would say is that it's really important to acknowledge that work in many of these spaces, so graduate admissions in STEM, for example, what we did, is slow by design. And so that if you feel resistance, right, don't consider it failure, which I think we often do, particularly because we are so overwhelmed with new initiatives that come to us from all the places at our institutions. It's not failure, it's really feedback. And one way that we have found success is we started small. We piloted things over and over again, right? So really, in many instances, we're in multiple iterations of different processes and different pilots. And so you can sort of gather some early and small wins and collect them. And those success stories then work to build momentum and sort of do what we talked about in terms of bringing folks along. So I think that that's really an important part. And, so that pacing, but also hand the baton to others. So it really is also a relay race, and make sure that you are willing to hand that baton to the
Yeah.
folks who are experts in that space. And finally, sort of, let's end with a bit more sort of inspirational, because I do think it matters, particularly in this moment of higher education in our country. I think it's really important to stay anchored together in the vision. So whatever it is that you're working on, to stay anchored in that vision, because I think that it's that purpose that will sustain you and sustain your team through the hard work, particularly in challenging times.
Yeah. Awesome. We did have a question I answered quickly with a little typing, but you know, and I know we just have a couple minutes left, but both of you are formal leaders in positions where you can use authority and voice. What if people are on a campus where changes are happening and people are being left out? How might faculty or staff advocate for using something like the toolkit, or even just being included in the conversations around change? Any thoughts on that? Jen,
That's,
Alyssa, that's
I
a
know.
tricky one, isn't
That's
it?
well, yeah, I mean that's right. That was one of the tensions on our
Yeah,
campus. I mean that the coach survey surfaced, right? And what was
yeah,
helpful for us is that we had that sort of public, we all knew we were doing the survey, that we would review the data, which then which then named that was one of the problems we had to solve. But I
hmm,
think, I mean, again, it's thinking about where are your spaces of influence and
hmm,
connection,
hmm,
and so are there some lateral moves you can make, right? Bringing the change toolkit. I have found Adriana Kizar's How Colleges Change book to
hmm.
be
Yep.
really helpful as well. And
Another
there's
great
some
link to put in the chat. Yep.
yeah, yeah. There's some great work in there around how to lead change from whatever position you're in. Informal leadership. It can be a very powerful form of leadership. So I'd recommend. I think that we don't have a lot of time. I'd recommend
Right.
that
Yep.
resource as a way to think through the answer to that question. But
That's
it's possible.
Yeah, I think that leading from where you are and trying to figure out how to find your voice, this is where kind of the political aspects of the toolkit, the political moves, the political context conversations are really important for people to explore where they are and then how they might lead in that context. So, Alyssa, we'll hand it over to you. And then I see Elizabeth, you popped back into the screen. Give Alyssa a closing comment on that. And then Elizabeth, if you want to say anything as we close up. So, Alyssa, anything to add to
Yeah,
Jen's?
I will just add very briefly. I think it just goes back to that metaphor of passing off the baton. I think that the other important thing is to physically go meet the folks where they are. So it is often really hard. Faculty they often don't even know about all the initiatives that are happening on campus. And so meeting them in their own meetings, in their own lab spaces, in their own so just coming to them, I think taking the burden of sort of the logistics and the organization and coming to them to start that conversation is a way that we were able to enlist voices that were not typically included in the process. Um, I've also found that truly anonymous surveys are very, very helpful, but they
Yeah,
have to be truly anonymous. Not the
yeah,
kind of anonymous where you don't put your name, but you put your email address and that's tracked, right? Faculty are
right.
very intelligent and smart folks. They're the
Yeah,
smartest folks you'll meet. And so they know when it's anonymous and not. And so I think part of this is sort of use instrumentation that we know has good value and give faculty an opportunity to have their voice heard across a variety of channels. So use, multiple mediums in order to actually solicit feedback. So make an effort to get those voices at the table. And it means that we sometimes have to do things in an unconventional way. I don't know if a lot of, I don't know if we're really used to that. We sort of get into our sort of structures and silos and that's it, right? So it's okay. Be comfortable being a little uncomfortable sort of to get that extra input.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you both. Round of applause for you and your participants. We'll be reprising this panel at the AAC&U annual meeting in January. If you're headed there, we'll have a little more time to go into more details. So stay tuned on that. Elizabeth, any final words from you?
I just wanted to thank you, Susan, for moderating the panel and thank Alyssa and Jen for contributing their experiences today. We really appreciate hearing how you've used the toolkit and how you've been able to make change on your campus. So thank you for your time and your wisdom of your experiences. I saw in a couple Q&As that people were wondering if there'd be a recording of this. I did just want to reiterate this will be available on the Pollia Center YouTube page. All of our webinars are available on our YouTube channel. So if you see something else interesting there, we have a lot of different topics, including previous sessions we've done on the Change Leadership Toolkit. And I'm sure we'll have more in the future as well. So if you're not on our email list, you can sign up at our website to get on our list and stay tuned about all of the wonderful things that we have coming out of the center. So thank you everyone for attending today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.